by using very elegant model. So that's where we are right now. So today, the first goal of today is to take a look of the short run of the how the short run um, of the exchange rate, how exchange rate is determined in the short run. So remember that in the long run, one of the important thing, right? Important thing is called PPP, right? What are the PPP stand for? It stands for purchasing power parity, right? Means what? Means in the long run, the price level or the price of a basket of the goods between a country will be the same, right? Just the macroeconomic counterpart of the law of the one price for individual one goods, right? So if you have exploit all of the arbitrage opportunity on the market, then your market should reach the equilibrium. Your market should work efficiently, so that the PPP and the law of the one price will hold. Okay, but that's in the long run, right? And in the short run, we know PPP's performance is not very good, right? PPP perform poorly. So this related to one of the additional readings that assigned in the homework, right? So PPP puzzle, right? If you already read a paper or you just skim through it, you know, like PPP puzzle means what? Means empirically PPP does not hold, and PPP does not hold. It's not only the short run, but also in the long run that it challenge our theoretical assumption or theoretical prediction. Okay, and it includes a lot of the potential reasons. So I won't spend too much time on this topic right now, and that is the main idea of the question number 6 in the homework. So you should go to refer to that paper and then about or take a look of why PPP does not hold in the short run and even in the long run. Okay, so now the books try to switch the attention from the long run perspective to the short run, right? We know PPP, it's a long run idea, ideally. So why in the short run the exchange rate fluctuates a lot? That's the idea of the chapter 15. So by constructing the short run model plus the long run model that we learned in previous chapter, so that we can know like what is the mechanism behind the exchange rate fluctuation. Okay, we already learned in chapter 14 what are the variables that will affect the exchange rate. The money supply in both countries, right? In home or foreign money supply, and the real output. What else? The liquidity, the interest rate of each country, right? So either of the macroeconomic variable will affect the exchange rate. But this is under the perspective of the long run. Okay, so we want to know in the short run how do expectation and the exchange rate arbitrage determine the exchange rate. So this should somehow ring a bell to you, right? So when you see expectation and interest rate arbitrage, what are the which parities you will think about? You will like which parity you think it's the most important one that we are going to explore in this chapter? That's supposed to be when it comes to the expectation, right? Supposed to be the UIP, right? Why do you think it's CIP, Peter?
Aren't you protecting yourself by getting that forward rate?
Yeah, but the key word here is expectation, right? So whenever it comes to the expectation, you should apply the UIP instead of the CIP,
Okay.
right? So CIP is using which one? CIP is using the forward exchange rate, right? Which is something we already know in the market, right? The long run exchange rate. But now when it comes to the expectation, remember the differences in CIP and UIP is just those two, right? UIP use this one as a long-term exchange rate, and CIP use this one as a long-term exchange rate. So when it comes to the expectation, we need to think about UIP, okay? So we will know what kind of the central bank policy determine the interest rate. So here we are going to use the monetary market model to determine the interest rate. Now we know that interest rate is important when it comes to the determination of the exchange rate between the country. Okay, we touched a little bit in chapter 14. So remember that in a simple model, we assume the constant, the L in the monetary model is a constant, right? But in general model, we assume that L is a function of the interest rate. So we are moving toward that direction. Now, interest rate could be a policy in each of the country. So by setting up the interest rate, you are not only to affect the domestic monetary market, but also affect the exchange market internationally. Okay? And then the most important things we are going to explore under the floating exchange rate regime and the fixed exchange rate regime, what kind of policy tools that the government could use. And we are going to have one of the famous theory or the conjecture is called Trilemma of the exchange rate. Okay, and that's the goal for chapter 15. Okay, so most of the part I already done it. I already explained it. So let's go over the slides one more time. So we know that the PVP does not really hold in the short run, right? So deviation from the purchasing power parity occur in the short run. The same basket of goods generally does not cost the same everywhere at all times. So the price level in different countries usually it's different. Okay, so PVP does not hold. Okay, and short run failure of the monetary approach. The economists to develop an alternative theory to explain the exchange rate in the short run. So in short, okay, so in short, what does it mean? Like in the short run, the exchange rate fluctuate too much. Fluctuate. That's the reason why we need to set up another model to take a look of what's happening in the short run. So here, one of the important theories called overshooting. And overshooting is because the rigidity in price level. We will talk about it today. Okay, and this approach in the short run is called asset approach. Okay, but asset approach, you just simply apply one of our old the theory that we learned. It's just the UIP, the approximation of the UIP. The whole chapter is based on this. If you understand UIP, and then now we need to know what are the policy to determine two of the most important variable in the UIP. We're going to know this and this. Okay? So, with that being said, let's review. So, this is the uncovered interest parity equation. But this is in the approximation term, right? Remember what is the UIP looks like for us originally. What is the background? Like, what is the story that we use to derive UIP? That's monetary. That's Jake. That's the monetary model. What about UIP? Like arbitrage, right? So people have two options to save their money. Remember that? So they could choose to save their money domestically. And after you will get 1 plus this, right? Save money through the third country, probably it's better. Third country, or like save money outside of your domestic market. Yeah. So, and then the second way to keep your asset, right? So the second method to keep your asset, that means you could save your money internationally, right? It means you convert your currency to the foreign currency at the very first stage, and then to put your money into the foreign bank, and then to convert it back after a year, right? So we will get what? This is something we will get, right? So this is the return for you, for the U.S. citizen, if you like try to send the money in Germany, right? So you need to convert your currency first, right? You need to sell your U.S. dollar to the European bank so that you can get the euro, and then you put into the European banks, right? And this is the yields or the interest rate that you get after 1 year. And when after a year, when you try to claim your asset, you need to convert it back to the US dollar, right? So originally UIP looks like this. So this has already shown multiple times. People have to know it and maybe memorize it. Okay, so originally the UIP looks like this. So you tell me that, oh, no, Jeffrey, that's not right. The UIP we learn is look like this. How do we get the UIP become like this? So remember, this is the approximation, right? Approximation of the UIP means what? Means we assume the interest rate is very close to zero domestically, and the foreign interest rate is very close to zero as well, and the exchange rate change are very close to zero. Right? By these three assumptions, we could expand the original UIP become this term. By how? By just using a little bit of the algebra, right? So what is this term? If I want to, can I write it as this? So the term in the orange square, it's equal to the term in the parentheses, right? And then the last step you need to do is just to expand it all of the, using the law of the distribution to expand the right-hand side of the equation. So you will get 1 plus I in dollar, interest rate in dollar, plus 1 plus interest rate in euro, plus the change rate this term, plus exchange rate change times this. And based on our assumption in the approximation, we assume all of the variables are very close to zero, right? So that the last term are going very close to zero, right? Think about that. If A is close to zero, B is close to zero, both A and B are very, very small number. What are their products? What is their product? If you calculate A times B, and A is a very small number, B is a very small number, the product of them will become an even smaller number, right? That's the reason why the last term could be neglect. Okay, so that the UIP approximation become the one we just see here, right? So this equal to this, and if we cancel out the 1, this parity should hold. Okay, and what is the meaning for all of the term? So let's take it as a review for the previous chapter. I dollar is the interest rate on dollar deposit, right? Or you could say it as the dollar rate of the return on a deposit. Here it is a typo, should be euro, right? And then I euro is the interest rate on euro, right? And here the last term is the expected rate of the depreciation on the dollar. Remember, this is the expected exchange rate. Right, so this is something I don't know, but this is the expected exchange rate in the long run. And this is the spot exchange rate of the currency, right? So if you're holding your asset not in the US, you put your asset in the foreign country, you actually face two risks, right? So one is the deposit, the interest rate change in a foreign country. Another is the exchange rate change. Okay, so all we say that this is called expected dollar rate of a return on euro deposit. Okay, and then the UIP, the non-arbitrage condition, tell us what the dollar rate of return should equal to the expected rate of return on euro, right? Because if the equality does not hold, so if the equality does not hold, if the equality is like this, what happened? will put their money more in domestic financial market so that the interest rate of the domestic financial market will decrease, right? You have more money supply, like more money balances on the market. So the banks, they won't need to raise their interest rate to attract the customers to deposit the money into their bank, right? Same thing. If it's opposite like this, the expected rate, if expected rate of the return on euro is like this, people will flock to foreign country and to switch their US dollar to the euro, right? And then it's the same mechanism. So you could say that the US banks, they want to attract more customers. They want to attract more savings so that they try to raise their interest rate so that the force of the left-hand side will be like this, go upward. On the other hand, the euro, because the money supply become more, so that will drive the interest rate in the eurozone, or say like in one of the country in Germany. Okay, so just a very quick review of the UIP. Okay, so what do we learn? We know, if we know the nominal interest rate domestically, and we know nominal interest rate in a foreign country, and we also have the expected future exchange rate, so that we could figure out the spot exchange rate like this, right? So the input of the model we know as the exogenous variable. Okay, so this is sometimes also called the parameters. That you have to, given that you know those numbers, those value of uh, the terms, right? Those variables value, you have to know it before you try to solve it up. So that if I know this, I know this, I know this, I know the nominal interest rate, the spot nominal interest rate here, and I know the expected future exchange rate. I also know the foreign nominal interest rate. I know I will be able to calculate out the spot exchange rate. So this is the background of the UIP, kind of a review again. You know, nothing new. The only difference is now we focus on the approximation UIP instead of the original format of the UIP, right? So once again, original format of the UIP is like this. The approximation of the UIP is like this. Approximation of the UIP. It's like this. Okay, so the parameter is the same, right? You see, so the parameter is the same. Here, the domestic rate of a return, foreign rate of a return, and then the expected future rate, right? So if you know those three, you should be able to find out the exchange rate, the spot exchange rate. Okay, so now if we put into the figure, okay, so put into the figure, this is the model we need to know. Okay, so let's take a look. What is this model is telling us? So this is called the foreign exchange market. So FX stands for foreign exchange. Okay, so it is a conventional term that you sometimes see FX or Forex. for forex. They all indicate the same thing. That's the foreign exchange, right? So in economics, whenever the market, we need to construct the demand side and the supply side, right? But in a foreign exchange market, who is the demand? Who is the supply? It's hard to pin down, right? So now we use the idea of the UIP, the domestic return. You could treat it as a supply, and then the foreign return, you could treat it as a demand of the foreign exchange. Okay, so we know that under the UIP assumption, domestic return, it's always a constant, right? So for example, if interest rate on a dollar, it's equal to 0.05, that's equal to 5% here. And when we try to construct the model, the graph we are looking at here, the vertical axis, expected return. So this will be a horizontal line, right? Because the interest rate, domestic interest rate, it's does not related to exchange rate, right? Once the government pin down this, no matter how this one move, the domestic return will always be this. Okay, whereas the foreign return will be different. Foreign return is equal to the deposit rate, the interest rate of the foreign country's bank, plus the change of the exchange rate, right? So now you see the exchange rate increase, the foreign return will, if the exchange rate between home country and a foreign country increase, the foreign return suppose will decrease. Using the mathematical equation will be the easiest way to see it. Okay, and if you organize one more time, right? So if your exchange rate, spot exchange rate increase, this term will be smaller, so that this term will be smaller. Okay, so that's how you construct the foreign return line, like a negative slope. So remember that the price of the foreign exchange market is the expected return, and the quantity here is the spot exchange rate. So it's a little bit hard to see in the beginning why the market is look like this, and then this is the demand and this is the supply. But if you think that this is the market for you to get the foreign currency, everything makes sense. Okay, so this one will determine how much foreign currency you could get. And this one is the price you have to pay. Right? So we know under equilibrium, under the UIP, the intersection of the two line is the equilibrium. So that means what? The foreign return is equal to the domestic return. Right? If this is not the case, this won't be the equilibrium. Right? If the foreign return is larger than domestic return, people will put their money to the foreign asset, right? They will convert their asset into a foreign currency so that the return on the foreign uh, currency will be lower. And in the end, this equality will hold. Okay, so let's see. Let's clear up the page and see the text here. So this page tells you if the dollar interest rate is equal to 5. Dollar interest rate is equal to 5. So this is the line they plot out. The domestic return only depends on the domestic currency's interest rate. Euro interest rate is 3%. Expected future exchange rate is this. So if you put out the equation, domestic return, it's easy, right? And foreign return will be 3% plus the expected future exchange rate. It's in the numerator divided by something I want to know, endogenous variable, right? And then if you calculate out this using the equilibrium condition, you will find out E is supposed to close to 1.2. So E is supposed to be this. That's the idea behind this graph. Okay, so since we already construct the market, what is the next step? We find out the equilibrium. The next step is usually do what in economics? Set equal. I already find out the equilibrium. So the next step is to change some certain condition and then to see what kind of a new equilibrium looks like, right? And in economics, this is called something's analysis. This is called comparative static analysis, right? This is my original condition, right? Original condition, it's here, here, and here. If right now I change my dollar interest rate to some certain level, what will happen to my equilibrium, right? Remember in the microeconomics, you have any kind of a good market, and you have P and you have Q, and you already construct the demand and supply, and you set up the quantity of the demand is equal to the quantity of the supply. You find out the equilibrium price, you find out the equilibrium goods. The next step is if the demand shift, if the supply shift, right? And we are just doing the same thing here. Okay, so now if I manipulate some of the conditions that I have here, right now my dollar interest rate is 5. What happens if my dollar interest rate move what happened is my euro interest rate moved from 3% to 5%. Or what happened for my exchange rate moved from 1.22 to 3, something like that, right? We need to shift the line, okay? So that started from the easiest example. So the books tells you to use 3 of the example to take a look of the new equilibrium, right? So we have 3 different separate shocks. Okay, so let's think about this. We know domestic return are simply based on the domestic interest rate. Foreign return is equal to this. Right? So let's think about it first. So what happened if the domestic interest rate change? Which line will shift? So if the domestic interest supply, okay, good. Yeah, exactly. So if the domestic rate change, the domestic return line, which is the supply in the foreign exchange market, will move, right? And the move will be easier to figure out. Let's hold on a little bit, but at least you identify which line move, okay? And then what about the foreign exchange rate? If the foreign exchange rate change, which line should move? Should this or this move? Should the foreign, yeah, FR should move, right? Because that's one of the variable in this equation, right? And same thing for the expected future exchange rate. If this one move, should be this, the FR move. The FR will shift upward or shift downward, right? So original condition is what? Original condition is domestic interest rate is equal to 5%, right? So if I move to 7%, that means the increase in domestic interest rate, right? So we will use the graph to see what happened. So originally we have euro interest rates equal to 3. Now, if the interest rate decrease, right, decrease in foreign interest rate, what happened to my spot exchange rate? Lastly, original expected future exchange rate is 1.224, right? So now if it moves from 1.224 to 1.2, so decrease in expected exchange rate, right? So what will happen? So let's use this graph to take a look. Okay, so original line is in blue, right? So this is my original line under the original condition. Okay, so now a change in the domestic interest rate. So the change should be increase in the domestic interest rate, right? So how do we use the graph to represent it? So expected return. This is right. This is my DR1. This is my FR. My equilibrium originally is here. Now, if I have the higher domestic returns, means I have the higher interest rate uh, in a domestic bank, right? So the domestic revenue should shift up, right? So under each level of the exchange rate, the interest rate expected return domestically increase at the same magnitude. So that's what this graph showed you. All right. So increase in the home interest rate shift the DR curve R up, making dollar deposit more attractive. Okay, so we see the dollar will dollar will appreciate new equilibrium at 0.5. So using the graph, it's easy because originally your equilibrium is at 0.1, right? Now you have the shock come in, your equilibrium become 0.5, right? So your equilibrium is here, right? What is the mechanism behind it? Why the point number 4 is not going to be the equilibrium? So if your domestic return is here, your foreign return is here, and under the original exchange rate, you are here, right? So this is 0.1, this is 0.4, this is 0.5. My question is why number 4 it's not an equilibrium? So in 0.4, dr it's larger than fr, right? So if the I foreign and the I domestic remain the same, this is not going to be the equilibrium. So the only thing that you could change is the exchange rate, right? So people will try to convert the foreign assets into dollar more because they know that if you put your asset in terms of the dollar, you could have more return. So that the demand of the US dollar increase, right? So now the US dollar are going to appreciate, right? Because people want to get more US dollar because they could enjoy higher returns if you put their asset in the dollars, right? So that's the reason why in a foreign exchange market, the exchange rate will drop. The exchange rate drop means the US dollar, the home currency, appreciate against the foreign currency. Let's take a look of the second, second, second shock. Let's look at the second shock. So the second shot is if now the euro interest rate fell from 3% to 1%. So that means what? That means the interest rate originally from 3 to 1. So by the same logic, you could see that this time, instead of moving the DR line, moving the domestic return line, we are going to shift the foreign return line, right? And in which direction? Now it's decreased. Okay, so it's shift down exactly because under the symbol of the exchange rate, the expected return on the foreign asset decrease at the same amount, right? That's the reason why you shift down your foreign return curve. Okay, so if you shift down your foreign return curve, you will have the same equilibrium. The idea is the same. Originally, the equilibrium is at 0.1, where the DR is equal to FR1. Now, since the shocks come in, the interest rate on the foreign assets decrease. My foreign asset curve moves from FR1 to FR2. Okay, so that makes my FR2 shift down. So the equilibrium will started from 0.1 to 0.7. Once again, why the original exchange rate cannot hold? The original exchange rate is here, right? So if you draw the new market curve, this is not in the intersection, not at the point of the intersection, right? So you will have a force in the market to push the dollar to appreciate as well. Okay, so the idea is the same, right? Either domestic interest rate increase or the foreign exchange rate, foreign interest rate decrease, their consequence should be the same, right? Because people are tend to hold their assets in terms of the US dollar more, so that the US dollar will appreciate against the foreign currency, right? So the first shock and the second shock, they should give you the same consequence. The equilibrium probably is not the same, but the direction is the same. Okay, I hope this is very clear. Yeah, if you just just take a look of the graph. That's not hard, but understand the story behind it is more important, right? Or I could just tell you, just shift down and then just move the equilibrium. That's it. But you have to think about why in the previous graph that this one is not the equilibrium point, and this one, and in this graph, this one is not the equilibrium point. And what is the force in the market to shift down? Thank you. Yeah, to shift down the exchange rate, right? Because people, their preference of holding the asset change. That's the fundamental. Now, because either it's because the domestic interest rate goes up, or it's because the foreign interest goes down, people has more preference, people prefer to hold the asset in terms of the US dollar more so that they can enjoy a higher return, right? So you see, so this will cause the short run exchange rate between US dollar and the foreign euro change. So here, US dollar appreciate against the euro. That's the idea. Okay. Lastly, the last shock is come from the expected uh, foreign exchange rate, right? So in the long run, if you believe that the US dollar are going to appreciate against the euro, what will happen to the current the spot exchange rate? That is the idea of this shock, right? So this shock is coming from this term, So expected future exchange rate between dollar and euro, right? So now if people believe that this are going to decrease, that means what? People are look optimistic in the US dollar, right? So uh, people expect US dollar will appreciate against euro, right? Remember the exchange rate, nominal exchange rate goes down means domestic dollar is appreciate. Okay, if people expect that in the future the dollar will appreciate, what will happen now? They will try to hold their asset in terms of the US dollar, right? So all three kind of a shock give you the same consequence, give you the same direction of the equilibrium, right? Either it's because the domestic interest rate increase, or it's the foreign interest rate decrease, or it's the expected exchange rate between domestic currency to the foreign currency decrease means expected domestic currency appreciate, right? So those three, instead of except for the first one is moving the DR, the second one and the third one moving the FR, all give you the same result of the moving of the equilibrium, right? So you will move from the 1 to 0.7 here, okay? And the rest of the work is just the calculation. Okay, and calculation of the equilibrium shouldn't be hard here, right? You just plug in dr is equal to fr and then find out the spot exchange rate. Use the algebra. That's it. Okay, so hope that's clear. That's the first part of today. Okay, so once again, one more time. Now we about the short run and the long run. Remember what's the last time we encountered this idea? In trade, there's one part we talk about short run and long run. And how do we define it? A monetary approach. I'm thinking of like how do we how do we define short run and long run in international trade theory? Like couple weeks ago. It's okay, Chen. Thank you. There are lots of the ways to define short run, long run in economics, right? And in a goods market, what do we say the production is in the short run, and what do we say the production is in the long run? What's the differences between Heckscher-Ohlin model and the specific factor model? Okay. In a specific model, what is the production input? The movement of the worker or the movement of the capital? Capital, right? Yeah, thank you. Movement of the capital. Remember, in the specific factor model, we assume that the equipment that you use in the agriculture sector cannot in the manufacturing sector, right? But in the long run, because you could sell the equipment in the agricultural sector to the market, so you could get a cash, and then you could buy another equipment in a manufacturer, like equipment market, so that you could buy the manufactured equipment. So you could convert them, right? So that's how we define long run and short run in goods market, right? In the consumption and in the investment and the government spending. In a good market, that's how we define whether the production input is movable, right? But now in the financial market, in the monetary market, how we define it is using the price level. Okay, so the short run assumption and the long run assumption, once again, we are looking at their differences right now. So in the short run, we assume that the price level is sticky. It is a predetermined non-variable fixed at this. Okay, so it's a fix. So in trade model, in specific model, the wage is the price of the labor, right? Remember, the wage is given, right? But in the long run, we say that wage, the price, become endogenous. Means we are trying to solve out the price in the long run, right? So price in the long run become flexible. This is the same thing here. So in the short run, price level is sticky. Okay, so that's the definition in this chapter. In the short run, the price level is sticky. Okay, and in the short run, the nominal interest rate is fully flexible and adjust to bring the money market to equilibrium. Okay, so the assumption of the sticky price is also called nominal rigidity. Okay, so it's very common idea in the short run. Right, so if you remember in the macroeconomics, you learn in undergraduate level that sometimes the price will have a floor, right? So the market will will have a force to push back to equilibrium, but because price is sticky, right? Price is sticky in the short run, so the moving of the price will be very low. That is the idea we are looking at right now. So in the short run, we believe that price is fixed. So the change could only come from interest rate. Okay, the change can only come from interest rate. But in the long run, we believe that price is flexible. Okay, So if we apply it to the previous chapter, so this is the monetary equilibrium, right? So once again, what's the left-hand side is the supply of the real money balances, right? Supply of the money, and right-hand side is the demand of the money, right? And this one is in a different country, supply of the money balances in Europe. This is the demand of the money balances in Europe. But remember that now we assume the price becomes sticky. That's why we put a bar on the top of the P. Okay, and this play an important role in the fluctuation of the exchange rate. So intuitively, you can think about that. If the price is flexible, fully flexible, exchange rate is supposed to react immediately once the shock comes in, right? Because of what? Because of the purchasing power parity, right? If the price change immediately after the shock, the exchange rate is supposed to fix, could be fixed because price could change. But this is not the case in the short run assumption, right? In the short run, we believe that the price in both of the countries are sticky. They are rigid. They are sort of a cost to move the price. So that what is the variable that should react to the shock? If you just take a look at the PPP, the only variable left is the exchange rate. That's the reason why people believe that in the short run, the price is sticky. We have one of the two, it's non-movable. The only variable that's left in the model is the exchange rate. So the exchange rate will fluctuate more given a different shock. That's the big idea, the logic behind this chapter. Okay, so if we take a look of the monetary market, it's just like a review. Okay, so here, the real money supply for the country one is like this. Why is it a vertical line? Why the monetary money supply in domestic market look like this? Because no matter how much the current interest rate is, once I pin down the monetary supply, once the Federal Reserve, pin down the monetary supply, you pin down the MS. Right? So MS, it's not related to the interest rate, at least in this model. Right? The real money supply is not a function of interest rate. Okay, using mathematical term, it's not a function of interest rate, or it's not related to the interest rate. Once the Fed pin down the money supply and the price level I already know, I could know the real money's balances, supply balances, right? So this is a vertical line here. Okay, what about money demand? The demand we defined is this, right? So once again, what's this? Because people holding the money because they have the money have the functions, right? They could store the value, unit of account, median of the exchange, right? So if the interest rate become bigger, the money demand will if interest rate is bigger, think about it, liquidity will become what? People will tend to save their money into the bank, right? Right?
Yes.
If the market's interest rate increase, so the liquidity of the money will drop. So if the liquidity of the money drop, the money demand supposed to drop.
This will drop.
Right? Remember that interest rate is the cost of holding money.
Cost of holding, yeah, okay. I have it written right here. Cost of
Yeah, interest rate is the cost of holding the money, right? The cost of holding money. So you can see that the price of the money, if we increase, the quantity of the money should decrease, so that the demand will be a negative slope like this. Is this clear? It took more time than I expected, right? Okay, so equilibrium is in point number 1, and we know the other points, not only point 1, will not be equilibrium because of what? Because the market will try to push them back, right? So here, supply is larger than demand. Supply is larger than demand. So what will the banks do? The commercial banks will try to decrease their interest rate, right? Because now there has a lot of people want to save their money into the bank. Okay, what about point number 3? Point number 3, the money demand is larger than money supply, right? So a lot of people want to withdraw their money out of the bank. They want to hold their money in their pocket, right? So at that time, the banks will try to raise their interest rate to attract more people to deposit into their vault, right? So that the interest rate goes up. So you can see the only equilibrium point here is monetary demand is equal to monetary supply. Is this clear? Thank you. Okay. So using the money market equilibrium, what is the goal? We're trying to find out the nominal interest rate in one of the country, right? In domestic market, we try to find out the nominal interest rate in foreign market. If we know M, we know Y, we know M, we know Y, we could find out those. Okay, so this is the idea of this is the exogenous variable, this is endogenous. Something we want to figure out is in the red box. Something is given information is in a green box. Okay, so now in the short run, if the money supply increase in domestic market, what happened? Okay, given that the price does not change, this is important. Okay, in the short run, price is fixed. Okay, so MU1 P bar 1 is the original money supply. Okay, now if the country increase in money supply, that will shift my supply curve to the right hand side. Right, so on the market, on the money market, lower the nominal interest rate, right? The banks are not willing to accept too many money, right? It's too much money on the market right now. They don't need to raise up their interest rate. Instead, they need to lower their interest rate so that people are going to so that people are not willing to hold, increasing the money supply and then lower the nominal interest rate. Yeah, money supply, price of the money, right? So price of the money will decrease. That's right. Yeah. Too many money on the market. So yeah, too many money on the market, so that banks could have a lot of the people to deposit, so they don't need to raise up their interest rate. They could lower their interest rate, right? Right. So equilibrium nominal interest rate will from here to here, move from I1 to I2. Okay. If there's a somehow there's a reason that increase the money demand, okay, so the money demand increase. So in the money market, the price of the money will increase, right? If people want to hold their money in their pocket more, right, they try to withdraw a lot of the money from the banks. The banks try to counter it. They will try to raise the interest rate to attract the people not to withdraw the money, right? So that will drive up the equilibrium interest rate. Okay? So one is a shift in the supply, one is a shift in the demand. So shift in supply, that usually will lower the price, right? Because you shift the supply means you move along on the demand curve, right? Whereas if you shift the demand, that means your equilibrium is always move along on the supply curve, right? So increase in supply, usually the price will drop, right? So this is also the case in terms of the money. Increase in the money demand, the price of the money will going up. So interest rate will goes up. Okay. So very quickly, let's take a look at this. The home central banks are that previously kept the money supply constant, switched to an expansionary policy, allow money supply grow at rate 5. Okay, so this slide tells us the policies, the permanent policy and the permanent policy, and the differences between the permanent policy and the temporary policy. What are their differences? Take a look at the definition. Expansion is expected to be permanent. The prediction of the long-run monetary approach and the future effect are clear. Okay, so all we learned in previous chapter, if the expansion is permanent, that will hold. So remember in the homework, in the assignment as well, I asked you to draw one of the diagram in the books, right? So you started from one of the shock, and then you see what's the real balances change, what's the price level change, and then apply the PPP, then you will see what's the change in the exchange rate. We are doing the same thing here. Okay, so that's under the condition that the policy it's a permanent, the shock it's permanent. Say that the government suddenly just try to print more money, and the growth rate of the money it's 5% or like one of the positive constant over the years. So that is called a permanent policy. But more, the monetary policies is in the short run. So that means what? They will adjust their policy constantly. They probably will increase their monetary supply by 5% this year and increase the monetary supply by 1% next year, or decrease the monetary supply by 1% another year. So some of the expansion in money is temporary. All else equal, the immediate short-run effect in the asset approach is asset supply of the real money balances. The whole interest rate will then fall in the short run. Okay, so they have the different you have to take it from a different perspective. If you take the long run perspective, the whole interest rate actually will raise, but in the short run, the interest rate will decrease. Using the graph will be easier. Okay, so now okay, we combine the money market and the foreign exchange market now. So what is their connection? It's the interest rate. So money markets, by using the whole money supply and money demand, we could figure out the interest rate domestically. And then once we pin down the interest rate, we could pin down the exchange rate. Okay? So this, the left-hand side, the left panel, is basically tells you this, determine I. And the right panel just tells you UIP. Right? FR equal to DR. The spot exchange rate is determined by foreign and domestic expected returns with equilibrium at point 1. Plot. Arbitrage force domestic and foreign return in the foreign market to be equal. As a result, that depends on capital mobility. Okay, so this we assume capital is perfect mobile. That's why UIP could hold. Okay? Okay, so once again, the capital mobility is crucial, right? Because if this does not hold, this one, the equilibrium cannot hold, the UIP will break down. Okay, and now we need to use this model to analyze more in the short run. Okay, so first of all, if I have a raise in the whole money supply, this will lower the whole nominal interest rate, right? So the equilibrium will move from 1 to 2, right? So the shock here is temporary monetary policy, expansionary policy. Right, the shock is here. The shock is MS increase from MS1 to MS2. Right, so money market equilibrium tells us what? If the supply of the money on the market increase, the interest rate will decrease. Right, so we use the red line here to show the new level of the equilibrium interest rate. Okay, and if you go to the foreign exchange market, this becomes the supply of the foreign exchange, right? So DR2, it's the new domestic return after the shock. So lower the domestic return in the foreign exchange market, right? So what happened for the investors or the foreign currency holder or the actors, the buyer and the sellers in a foreign exchange market. If the domestic return decrease, that means they will try to convert their domestic currency, which is dollar, to the foreign currency, which is euro here, right? So that dollar, people don't want it. They want to get rid of the dollar because they believe that the asset in terms of the dollar will decrease because of the interest rate decrease, right? So get rid of the dollar, want to get more of the euro, so the nominal exchange rate will increase. What is the economic meaning of the exchange rate increase? Exchange rate increase means the dollar to depreciate against the euro. Right? Okay. So let's think about what happened if the foreign money supply increase. So if the foreign money supply increase, what happened to the whole money market? Nothing, right? Nothing. It will not change the money supply, domestic money supply. It will not change the domestic money demand. So the interest rate will hold at the same level, right? Okay. But if this one increase, based on our model, the monetary supply, the money supply in Europe increase, the supply in Europe increase, that will cause the interest rate, the rate of the return in Europe decrease, right? So if this one decrease, this is something we already take a look in the beginning of the lecture today, right? So if the foreign interest rate decrease, that will shift down the FR line here, right? So this will drive my equilibrium from 1 to 2. Okay, so what is the story behind it? If the European Central Bank increase their money supply, this will lower down the interest rate of the euro, right? So people are not willing to hold the euro. Instead, they would like to hold the dollar, right? So the dollar supposed to become more likable, become more preferable on the market. So the dollar will appreciate against the euro, right? So how do we show it in the exchange rate notation? It will drop, right? So this is the story that this graph tells you from 1 to 2, causing the dollar to appreciate against euro, right? Okay, so I'm gonna skip this. So you see, so just quickly wrap up. Using monetary and asset approach, this is in the short run, asset approach. All we do is using UIP approximation, this one. And we try to fix the price level in both of the country because we believe that sticky price or rigidity, nominal rigidity in price, right? So this asset approach basically is centered around the UIP. It's a short run approach. Compared with the one we just know before, monetary approach, this is flexible, fully flexible. Price becomes the endogenous variable. The last one, this PPP, is something we believe in long run. Okay? So basically, it's the conclusion of the 3 chapters we just discussed. Expectation and arbitrage plays an important role in the monetary market as well as in the exchange market. Okay? So this is the graph that talk about the short run and long run. So once again, asset approach, it's short run, right? So we believe every price in each of the state is fixed. And we add one more term. This is the transmission of the policy, right? While in chapter 14, this is chapter 15, it's chapter 14, we focus on monetary approach, and we simply just put down the Keynesian model in the money market, right? And we finally apply PPP to find out the long run exchange rate. Okay? So now we need to use the graph that we see to combine the money market and the foreign exchange market to see what happened in the long run. So in the long run, it will look like this. So if the policy is a permanent raise in the US money supply. Okay, so remember, previously it's not a permanent expansion. The previous discussion, it's on the temporary expansion of the home money supply. What about the short run impact? Okay, so this is the permanent policy short run impact. Okay, this will lead to the overshooting. Okay, let me just give you some of the idea. Okay, so MS1 increased to MS2. Okay, so in the short run, we still believe that the price is fixed, right? So we will lower the US nominal exchange rate in the short run. Okay, so now what about the transmission of the policy to the other country? We need to take a look of the foreign exchange market, right? And simply this one is just the UIP. So first of all, domestic return fall. Okay, so domestic return fall, DR1 moved to DR2, right? This is something we see in the beginning of the lecture today. Okay, at the same time, the foreign return rates, okay, higher expected future exchange rate. Okay, because the people know that the US is printing the money. So they think that the future, the dollar will depreciate. The expectation of the dollar will depreciate against the euro, right? So they believe that if they're holding the euro right now, their return is supposed to be higher. Okay, so you see now the permanent policy, the temporary policy, the difference is what? The change of the foreign return. right? So if the Fed just announced that they are going to use QE forever, people will believe that the holding the US dollar is not a good investment because US dollar will depreciate in the future as the theory predict, right? So if you're holding the foreign if you converted your US dollar to the Europe, you can avoid it. More so, you could have more return on it, right? So now the FR1 will move to FR2 at the same time. Okay, so you see the exchange rate is jumped from 1 to 2. Okay, so that means what? That means the US dollar depreciate from 1 to 2. Okay, but what happened in the long run? Okay, long run adjustment is what? So for the short run should be fine, right? Right now, short run should be fine from 1 to 2. Okay. Okay. In the long run, the price are flexible. So the home price and the exchange rate both raise in proportion with the money supply. Okay? Okay, and this is because of what? Which parity? In the long run, which parity? It's purchasing power parity, right? So the home price level and the exchange rate both raise in proportion with the money supply. Remember in the previous chapter, this is the theoretical prediction that we have. Okay, so price raised to P2 US. Okay, so what happened? So this is my policy shock in the short run, right? But now in the long run, my price will adjust. So since my price will adjust, everything will become the original equilibrium. So the interest rate will go back, nominal interest rate will go back, real money supply will go back to the original level simply because the price adjusts in the long run. Okay, so what happened if this is the case in the foreign exchange market? Now, 2 is the short run, right? Foreign return remains higher, expected exchange rate is permanently higher, but domestic return raised to its original level. Right, so now 2 line, the interest rate, domestic interest rate in the long run will shift up, right? Gradually change. Right? So if we apply the DR equal to FR in the long run, we will see the long run adjustment of the exchange rate. It's moving along this curve. Okay, so there's no 2 double whammy anymore. Now, in the long run, DR will shift back to the original level because the price change in domestic market. right? So the equilibrium will move from 2 to 4. So you see what's the exchange rate change? It's from this point to this point, and then shift back. But you will never going back to 1. Right? So exchange rate, if you write it, exchange rate, okay, exchange rate, and this is time. If you plot this, it will look like what? It will look like this, suddenly jump, and like this. It's not very clear. Hold on. The exchange rate, the trend of the exchange rate. This is time. This is T naught, means the policy was announced and executed. Original exchange rate, E1. At shock, it will jump to E2, but it will gradually shift back to E4. Okay, so this model we call short-run overshooting of foreign exchange rate. And this is Rudiger Dornbusch's work. Very important. Very important. Yeah, I guess I just give you the idea. So the exchange rate will be like this. It is a lot. Yeah, I know. One more thing. Just let me finish one more thing. I won't get into chapter 16. I try to, one more thing, because one thing, it's more into, it's definitely a lot. Okay, yeah, we only have 12 weeks, right? In the long run, the dollar devalue, exactly, depreciate. But the key is we try to explain the short run fluctuations more, right? We try to why short run fluctuation a lot, right? PVP simply cannot satisfy us because we see PVP is a puzzle. CVP always does not satisfy. PVP is poorly performed across the country. So we try to separate the exchange rate into a short period segment. And the overshooting provide the answer. Right? Because the policy of each of the country, right? Original, this is your this is your original exchange rate. And original level is like this. After the policy announced, because the double whammy, right? One is the domestic return decrease, one is the expectation of the foreign future exchange rate increase. It will lead you, your currency will depreciate, but it's depreciating more than the value that it should be, right? So in the short run, it will jump, and then it will go back gradually back to the long run level. This is called overshooting. This is called this is the most important key concept here in the chapter 15 from my perspective. Okay, so you got to know this graph. You got to know this graph. Why does it look like this? Why does it look like this? Because the price is rigid, right? But once we put into a long perspective, the price could move. so that the real money balance is heading back to its original level. Okay? So that leads us to the we talked about the short run and long run, right? And then now we are discuss two different exchange rate regime. One is called float, one is called fixed. They have the different logic behind it. Okay, so if a country, okay, so if we believe in the short run theory, okay, right, if the country is under the float exchange rate regime, means what? Means they peg their interest rate to the international level. So how do you peg your interest rate? You peg your interest rate by setting a certain level of the monetary supply. Right? So in the short run, the choice of the M determine the interest rate I in the money market. In turns, via the UIP, the level of the I determine the exchange rate E. Right? So the first part of the sentence is money supply is equal to the money demand. It's okay, Audrey, no worry. And so that we find out I. Secondly, once we find out I, we apply UIP. So we could have the exchange rate in the short run. So the money supply is the input. What's the input called? It's the exogenous variable, right? In the model. Exchange rate is the output of the model, right? So the government under the float regime, most of the country using right now, they control their monetary policy because each of the country they have their central bank, so they control their monetary policy. They print their money at their will, right? Instead of peg the exchange rate to hold the exchange rate at a fixed level for a certain across the time, you peg the interest rate, okay, by controlling the money supply. So by control the money supply, you control the I via I because UIP you control E. No, not control. The E is something you get. So this one will fluctuate more because of the overshooting, right? Whereas under the fixed exchange regime, logic is different, policy is different. Okay, this is more prevail in the after the World War II, the uh, golden standard institution. Instead of pegging the I by controlling M, the monetary authority means the central banks of each of the country picks a fixed level of the exchange rate E. So you peg E. Okay, so by peg E, in the short run, fixed E pins down the whole interest rate via the UIP. Right? So you cannot control your I anymore. Right? If you choose to peg your exchange rate, the UIP tells us you can only control exchange rate. If you control the exchange rate, I is determined as well. Okay. In turn, this I determine the money supply I necessary to meet the money demand, right? So now the logic is it's just reverse. You have E via UIP. You're supposed to hold domestic interest rate. By having the domestic interest rate, you need to have certain amount of the money supply, right? So you lose the policy's authority if you're choosing to peg the E, if you're choosing to pin down to fix the exchange rate. Whereas if under the float regime, it's what I could use monetary policy to control my domestic interest rate, so that I will have more fluctuating exchange rate because of the UIP and other parity, interest parity. Okay, so they are different. Fix is here. Okay, let me write down a better. So fix. Okay, float. You use monetary supply, right? Monetary policy as your policy tool to affect the interest rate on the market. But since you pin down the interest rate via the UIP or CIP, the interest rate parity, this will be pinned down. And this will have problem of the overshooting, as Dornbusch's theory tells us. Whereas under the fixed exchange rate regime, we reverse the policy tool. We peg the E. In order to peg the E, I need to pin down my I, right? And this is because UIP or interest rate parity. And then because I want to pin down I need to pin down M. Okay? Very important. So as you could see, historically, once all of the country moves from the fixed exchange rate regime to flow exchange rate regime, the arbitrage opportunity will on the market, right? And this is the famous story of George Soros, if anybody knows him, right? He short the English pound before the English British what's the UK central bank name? Before the central bank in the UK abolish the fixed exchange rate, so that he expect that the British pounds will depreciate in a short period of the time. So he shorted, and he gained his fame and a lot of money at the time. Okay, the last part of today, I told you there's a trilemma that we call macroeconomics, especially in the foreign exchange rate theory. So what are the trilemma? So trilemma, people always talk about dilemma. Dilemma means A and B cannot hold at the same time, right? But now it's a trilemma. So trilemma means what? If I have three conditions, only two will hold at the same time. So if 1 and 2 hold, means 3 will not hold. And if 2 and 3 hold, 1 will not hold. And if 1 and 3 hold, 2 will not hold. That's the meaning of the trilemma. So three conditions, only 2 could be hold. So let's see what's the 1, 2, 3 here. So the first one, the first condition is the fixed exchange rate. Okay, so this basically is a choice of the government, right? You could either choose you could choose to fix your exchange rate or you not fix it. So this is the choice of the policy, right? And this is simply just because of what? The choice of the government, right? Some people believe that the fix is good because it provides a stability in a trade investment. The exporters and importers, they won't need to worry concerned about a lot of the exchange rate risk. Okay. On the other hand, on the flip side, this also means that people could expect zero depreciation or appreciation in the future. Okay, so fix and float, there's no absolutely right or absolutely wrong. So just the belief in some sense. Secondly, international capital mobility. So you could treat it as a capital control or not. So as you could imagine, capital control, the democratic country or like less authoritarian political regimes believe that the freedom of the citizen, right? So capital control shouldn't be a policy tool, right? You should let your citizen to deposit their asset domestically, or if they want to convert their asset outside of the country, they could do so. For example, U.S. does not have the capital control mostly, but some of the Asian countries, especially the developing countries, they have very strict capital control policy. So the government there tend to make the people in that country to put their money domestically instead of convert it to the foreign currency. Okay, this is the second one. All right, and what is this? The theoretical background, what is this? This is the UIP, right? And the third condition is the monetary policy autonomy. So this is basically followed by this model, the Keynesian monetary policy model, right? So it should be this. Okay, so if the interest rate is higher and interest rate is lower, you could stimulate your home economy or cool down your home economy, right? So control interest rate, it's an important policy tool for the Fed, right? In order to control the interest rate, what do you need to do? You need to control the money supply, right? And during the recession time, the Fed will lower their interest rate. And during the hyperinflation time, the Fed will increase their interest rate. Right? So monetary policy, this is equal to like QE, right? So monetary supply increase. Sometimes contractionary. Okay. And the striking result here in macroeconomic tell us those three conditions, only two could be held. Okay, so 1 and 2, what is 1? 1 is the fixed exchange rate, right? And 2 is the capital control, no capital control, right? If you want to hold this one, you will have to give up your monetary policy's autonomy. Means you cannot control your interest rate anymore if you try to peg the exchange rate. Okay? If under the condition of the no control. Secondly, if no capital control assumption apply, and then you want to control, you want to have your monetary policy autonomy. Autonomy means you can control it. You have to give up what? You have to give up the fixed exchange rate. Right? So this is something we call in the floating exchange rate regime. Right? If you didn't apply the capital control, you allow the people to buy or sell the currency frequently, and they could buy the asset in a foreign country if they want, no matter how much money they spend outside of the country. And you also want to hold your monetary autonomy. You want to have the autonomous right of your monetary. You want to able to control the interest rate. You have to give out a fixed exchange rate. Okay. Lastly, if you believe the fixed exchange rate, and then you believe the, 3 is what? If you believe you want to control the interest rate, monetary autonomy. 3 is monetary autonomy, and 1 is fixed exchange rate. You have to apply strict capital control. This is so-called macroeconomic foreign exchange rate trilemma. Very, very important. And a lot of the investors historically made a lot of money based on this. Okay, if you think about you just think about capital control as a right of the government, as a choice of the government. Some countries choose capital control. Yes, some countries apply the capital control. Some countries live in a free market, like the US and the UK. So there's supposed to be 2 different regimes of the foreign currency, and one will eventually break up. One will eventually break down. All right. So, for example, Chinese economy, China, their foreign exchange policy, it's more like this. The Central Bank of China, they can control their monetary policy. They could print the amount of money if they want. They could by control the market exchange rate, and they apply very strict of the capital control by law, so that this implies what? Implies their exchange rate supposed to be float, right? But this is the real case right now. So if you are smart enough, what should you do? I will leave it as maybe a potential question in the final. All right, so that's the end of today. I was not able to get into chapter 6.